Okay, let's think about this for a second. Would you ever trust an unlicensed pilot to fly your family somewhere important?
Probably not, right?
Right. Or, say, an untrained surgeon for a critical operation? I mean, definitely not.
Absolutely not.
So it makes you wonder about the people we actually put in charge,
Right.
Governing our cities, states, the whole country. Do we apply the same kind of rigorous standards there?
Well, that's the provocative question. Levne Moten, PhD, really tackles head-on. And what's so insightful about his approach, I think, is how he immediately frames governance, not as like a political hobby, but as a critical profession.
Exactly.
He draws these direct parallels to aviation, medicine, even architecture, just to underscore this need for, well, a baseline rigor.
Yeah, exactly. And Dr. Moten himself is quite a figure. His background is in science, but he's also clearly a very keen civic observer.
Yeah.
You get the sense he's a passionate defender of constitutional responsibility in public service.
That comes through strongly.
So today, our mission really is to do a deep dive into his proposal. It's quite compelling, this civic reform idea he calls license to govern. LTG. He's laid it all out in a pretty detailed white paper. And what strikes me is how he blends these really practical, like real-world analogies with a much deeper, almost philosophical aim for the basic health of our democracy.
It's more than just policy tweaking.
Definitely. It really makes you reconsider what we should expect from our leaders.
And that's really his starting point. He looks at what he identifies as a deep irony in how we approach governance.
An irony. How so?
Well, Moten argues there's this sort of inverse relationship happening. The more power an office holds power over millions of lives, freedoms, the less formal competence or, demonstrated qualification seems to be required.
Huh. That's interesting. Unlike,
say, a civil engineer designing a bridge or a teacher in a classroom, he points out that elected officials are often chosen for charisma, maybe powerful rhetoric, or just fitting in with what he calls tribal ideologies.
And he's pretty direct about the current situation. Doesn't mince words.
Not at all. He calls it unsustainable. And he's very clear from his viewpoint. Incompetent governance is not a partisan issue. It is a systemic failure.
Okay, so it's systemic. And does he give examples?
Yeah.
Because that's a strong claim.
He does get specific, and this is where, we need to be clear we're reporting his perspective. He highlights certain high-profile progressive figures like AOC and the Squad, and also points to candidates he views as radical, like someone named Madani, who ran for mayor in New York.
Okay.
He uses these examples to illustrate what he sees as a lack of civic literacy, maybe a lack of real-world experience, or operating without sufficient regard for fiscal reality or constitutional limits.
Right, so he's pointing fingers then.
Well, yes and no, because the really critical distinction he makes right after mentioning those names is this, and it's worth quoting him directly, I think.
Go ahead.
He says, the problem is not their politics, it is their lack of civic qualification, and this criticism extends equally to demagogues of all stripes. Oh, okay, so it's broader.
Exactly. He follows up, my demand is simple and universal. Prove you are prepared to govern before you are allowed to govern. That really lands his point about being a civic observer focused on competence itself, not just, partisan point scoring.
That is a powerful statement.
Yeah.
And intentionally provocative, it sounds like. So if that's his diagnosis, the systemic failure, what's the prescription? You mentioned the license to govern.
That's it. The core of his proposal is a mandatory certificate of training in governance, the CTG, for anyone seeking public office.
Mandatory. Okay. And his argument isn't to limit democracy.
No, quite the opposite, according to him. He argues it's about elevating it. His stated objective is ensuring baseline civic competence, constitutional fluency, and ethical grounding in all public servants.
Baseline competence, constitutional fluency, ethical grounding. Got it.
And he's careful, very careful, to push back against the idea that this is about elitist control or some kind of partisan indoctrination.
So that would be the immediate worry, wouldn't it? Absolutely. For Moten, the CTG is about integrity, not conformity. He actually calls it a rescue mission for a republic at risk of incompetence.
Wow. Rescue mission.
Yeah.
That's strong language. But, okay, how would this rescue actually work? How do you avoid it just becoming another hurdle, especially for ordinary people wanting to run?
That's where his analogy comes in. He uses the driver's license. It's quite relatable.
Okay, like a driver's test.
Sort of. He says the CTG should be attainable, nonpartisan, and enforced with minimal bias. It's a competence test, he keeps stressing, not a loyalty oath.
So what does that mean practically? If I wanted to run for, say, city council, Dr. Nemoten's proposing a specific path, a structured way to make sure I know the basics.
Pretty much. And if you think about it, his proposal kind of cuts through all the noise, that feeling of information overload we all get.
Oh, so.
He's basically saying, look, let's figure out what knowledge is absolutely essential for governing. Let's make that knowledge clear, make it accessible to everyone, and then require it. It's about creating a common foundation.
A common ground of understanding before the political debates even start.
Exactly. Moving beyond just ideology to a shared base of civic literacy. And he's specific about what candidates must understand.
Like what?
Well, the Constitution, obviously, the one they swear to uphold, but also the actual limits and responsibilities of government, the basics of law, budgeting, crucial stuff, crisis response, ethics, history.
Okay, the fundamentals.
Right. And he emphasizes these are civic necessities, not, partisan talking points, which ties right back to his background, that focus on constitutional responsibility. It's called for an objective standard, really.
So it's less about what you plan to do politically and more about whether you're actually equipped operationally to do the job of governing.
That seems to be the core idea.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
And it sounds like he's thought about the how. How would this CTG actually work? He mentioned a framework.
Yes, he outlines a tiered educational framework, and the key features he highlights are it needs to be free, publicly available, rigorously nonpartisan, that's critical.
Free and nonpartisan, okay.
And tiered. So different levels for local, state, federal office. The focus is on practical, usable knowledge, not just abstract theory. And it would all be assessed through a structured, test-based system. You can really see his scientific background influencing this structured approach.
A scientist's solution, maybe? And how would someone actually get this certificate? Are there classes?
He proposes two main paths. Option 1, a year-long course. Option 2, an intensive 2-week boot camp.
A year-long course sounds comprehensive.
It is. It covers foundational stuff like the Constitution and American civic structure, then gets into public finance, budgeting, ethics, law, practical governance, including crisis management, very important. It also covers communications, civic engagement, and it finishes with the capstone project. Candidates would actually design mock governance programs, so it's meant to be deep immersive.
Okay, but what about the boot camp? 2 weeks sounds intense.
Incredibly rigorous is the impression I get. It's designed for rapid immersion, focusing on the Constitution in action, historical case studies, ethical decision-making.
So more hands-on.
Very much so. Critically, it includes simulations, things like creating and defending a mock budget, and crucially, crisis management simulations think natural disasters, public health crises.
That sounds incredibly practical.
Yeah, and also practical skills through role-playing with different stakeholders, listening workshops. Then it all wraps up with a big exam, and if you pass, the certification.
And is it a one-and-done thing?
No, the CTG would be valid for 5 years. Then you'd need continuing education to renew it to make sure the knowledge stays current.
Keeps people up to date. Makes sense.
Yeah.
And you mentioned tiers earlier.
Right, 3 levels of certification. Level I is for municipal stuff, town councils, school boards, that sort of thing.
Local level.
Level 2 is for state roles, state reps, governors, etc. And level 3 is the federal level, Congress, Senate, key executive appointments.
And the content gets harder.
Progressively more complex content and more challenging simulations at each level. The idea is to scale the training precisely with the job's responsibilities. It seems very carefully thought out.
Okay, but let's circle back to that big concern. The idea that this whole thing, this license to govern, could just become a tool for, well, controlling who gets to run, for ideological conformity, or as he put it, administrative tyranny. That's a real fear, isn't it?
It's probably the biggest potential criticism, yeah. And Nemoten tackles it directly in the white paper.
So he anticipated this pushback. It sounds like he built in some safeguards to prevent it becoming, an elite filter or a way to brainwash candidates.
He really did. He has a whole section titled Implementation Without Indoctrination, and he details several key safeguards.
Like what?
Okay, first, independent oversight. The board developing and assessing the CTG wouldn't be political appointees. It'd be retired judges, constitutional scholars from across the spectrum, even randomly selected citizens who've already earned their CTG, for impartiality.
Okay, that sounds diverse. What else?
Second, Transparency, all the course materials, the test questions, how it's graded, everything public, open for anyone to see.
Total transparency. That helps build trust.
Third, public access. The courses, the boot camps, free, online, open for review. Again, accessibility and accountability.
Makes sense. Anything else?
And finally, an appeals process. If someone's CTG application is rejected, they have a right to appeal, and there has to be a clear, documented reason for the rejection.
Right. So oversight, transparency, access, appeals.
Yeah.
It shows he's really grappled with how a system like this could go wrong. And he's trying to build in protections against that, trying to build trust right into the structure.
Exactly. It reflects a deep understanding of the potential pitfalls.
It really seems his passion isn't just about spotting the problem, but making sure the solution actually empowers democracy by preparing people, not, filtering them based on ideology.
That seems to be the driving force.
And he loops back to those powerful analogies at the end, doesn't he?
He does. It's a really compelling closing argument. He says, we do not let doctors experiment on our bodies without training. We do not let pilots take the yoke of a 737 without flight hours. But we allow strangers with no civic knowledge to make laws, raise taxes, deploy troops, and suspend liberties. It is time to end this madness.
End this madness. And he really frames the LTG as, what was it, the maturation of democracy.
Yes, not an attack on democracy. It is maturation. His ultimate goal, he states, is ensuring public servants are competent stewards of public trust.
Competent stewards.
Which he believes is the best defense against ignorant tyrants, left or right.
So Dr. Nemoten's proposal really leaves us with a big question, doesn't it?
Yeah.
In this world which feels increasingly complex, where the stakes just seem so high, is having basic civic knowledge truly optional for our leaders anymore?
It's a fundamental question about expectations.
And if it isn't optional, what responsibility do we have as citizens to make sure that preparedness isn't just hoped for, but actually required? That's a powerful thought from Lev Nemoten's License to Govern. Definitely gives you something significant to chew on.